The car wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt. Emma was halfway home, barefoot in the rain, carrying the remains of the report Nick had thrown away, when headlights exploded through the darkness. An strain tickled her out of the road, seconds before the car hit. Then he spoke into his phone and said the words that changed everything. This wasn't an accident. The man who had just broken her pride had also assigned 4 guards to keep her alive. Picture this. It is late. The kind of late where the city just holds its breath. Emma stands totally frozen on the cold marble floor of Carver International. Gripping financial reports she bled over for 3 agonizing weeks. And Nicholas Carver? He does not even blink. He stares out his penthouse window at the relentless rain and casually tells her to walk home. She begs for just one more look, but his voice is absolute ice. The sheer weight of that disrespect is enough to shatter anyone. Today, you and I are going to unpack this story together. Because we have probably all made this mistake, holding on to something meant to break. Sometimes, the people who force you out into the freezing dark are actually doing you the biggest favor of your life. It is 11 at night, and the sky is tearing itself apart with a brutal downpour. Emma is stranded. She took the subway just to meet his insane deadline, and now she is standing there, explaining that the trains are dead and she is in heels. Does Nick care? The man is completely void of empathy. He coldly blames her for not planning ahead and calls her flawless data absolute garbage. But let us be real here. Emma survived on black coffee for 2 weeks, checking every single digit 3 times until her eyes burned. Her work was absolute perfection. But there is a heavy truth we all must face eventually. When you hold the actual truth, the people terrified of it will always try to make you feel like you are the crazy one. She found his dark secret, and it terrified him. Emma had not just found an accounting error. She had stumbled right into the belly of the beast. Hidden deep within those spreadsheets was ironclad proof that someone was skimming heavy cash from his shadow companies. Seeing those quiet men in tailored suits slipping through the lobby at 3 a.m, she knew her boss was tied to the underworld. She is not blind, but she is desperate. Her mother is lying in a hospital bed, miles away, and the medical bills are a crushing weight on her chest. This job paid triple what she could get anywhere else. But here is a lesson that often costs way too much to learn. No amount of money is ever worth your peace of mind. Ignoring the sirens just because the paycheck is heavy is a dangerous trap that will eventually swallow you whole. She whispers a quiet plea, her voice trembling as she mentions the 40-minute walk and the lack of an umbrella. But Nick snaps like a dry branch. He threatens to have her dragged out by force if she lingers another second. He turns to her, and the dead, vacant look in his eyes sends a primal chill straight down her spine. 2 massive security guards are already blocking the exit, waiting for the signal. Her cheeks burn with total humiliation. Everything inside her wants to hurl those heavy reports right at his chest, to scream that she is being punished for being too honest. But she bites her tongue and walks away. True strength is not always about fighting back right in the moment. Sometimes it is simply knowing when to walk away in silence and survive another day. Her heels click against the slick marble lobby, echoing like a slow countdown to her ruined career. Riding that silent elevator down from the 40th floor feels like descending straight into an empty grave. She catches her reflection in the metal doors. 27 years old, her hair coming undone, her mascara failing against the tears she fights back. But she refuses to break. She will not let a hollow man like Nick claim her tears. The night guard ignores her as she pushes through the revolving doors and straight into the brutal storm. The freezing rain immediately soaks right through her thin blazer. But you have to remember something important about the storm. The heaviest rain is exactly what washes away the toxic things you no longer need to carry. Within seconds, she is completely drenched. Dark streaks of makeup run down her cheeks, painting a quiet picture of her exhaustion. And that heavy folder she clutches to her chest? The ink is bleeding out in dark blue rivers. washing away the only solid proof she had left. She takes a deep breath and forces her legs to move, telling herself she can survive a 40-minute trek. She begins pushing through the flooded, abandoned streets. Thunder shakes the concrete, vibrating right into her bones as the cold bites at her skin. She truly believes this is her absolute rock bottom. But life has a strange rhythm. Whenever you feel like you are buried under the worst the world can offer, it setting the stage for your inevitable comeback. Stick with me here, because we are about to uncover the real damage Carver caused. Emma is moving like an absolute ghost through the unforgiving Chicago rain. Her soaked heels feel like anchors, dragging her down with every step, but the heavy weight of humiliation is what truly exhausts her. The wind howls violently, throwing icy rain directly into her eyes until her face goes numb. She is running entirely on fumes, but look at her closely. That is what true grit looks like. You keep walking when everything tells you to fall. Never let a brutal night stop your forward motion. Sabum, the major breakthrough you are desperately praying for, is usually waiting just beyond the point where you want to surrender. Her mind drifts to her mother, resting in that quiet little nursing facility up in Michigan. Her mom is the only soul left who truly believes in her. And now, Emma just lost the single lifeline keeping them both afloat. All those quiet sacrifices, selling her old car, living in a dark, tiny apartment, skipping meals. It all feels like a cruel joke. She played entirely by the rules, worked herself to the bone, and got destroyed for doing her job perfectly. A bitter, broken laugh escapes her lips. A sudden, violent gust of wind slams into her chest, forcing her to grab onto a rusted street lamp just to keep from collapsing. It is a harsh truth we all have to face. Eventually, when the corrupt world tries to blow you away, true love and family are the only anchors that hold you grounded. Those expensive heels she saved up for are completely ruined. One is bent sideways, and her freezing feet are starting to bleed. So she makes a choice. She strips the shoes off and grips them tightly in her hands. She walks barefoot through the icy puddles, reclaiming some small piece of control over her fate. That waterlogged folder of evidence? It is practically mush now. With a surge of raw anger, she marches to a corner trash can and shoves it inside. 3 agonizing weeks, 21 sleepless nights, gone. She did not just lose a job tonight. She lost her belief in a fair system. But sometimes you have to empty your hands. You have to drop the broken pieces of your past, so you are ready to pick up whatever comes to save you next. Stripped of her dignity, Emma tilts her head back and stares up at the suffocating black sky, letting the cold rain wash over her face. For a fleeting second, she genuinely wonders if it would be easier to just fade into the background. Nobody would even notice. Definitely not the boss, who erased her entire existence without a second thought. But Emma is built from something much harder than that. She clenches her frozen jaw, tightens her grip on those ruined shoes, and keeps walking. She tells herself it is just a few more blocks to her empty apartment. She is completely blind to the fact that her entire destiny is about to drastically pivot. It is a beautiful lesson, really. Your biggest, life-altering moments always strike exactly when you think your story is already over. She takes a sharp turn down a desolate, narrow alleyway. The broken streetlights flicker weakly, casting long, wavering shadows that make her look like a lonely ghost drifting over the wet pavement. The storm is intensifying, violently rattling the metal shop signs with a sound straight out of a nightmare. She wraps her arms tightly around herself, her feet so numb they feel like stepping on crushed glass. This icy city feels completely devoid of mercy tonight. She gazes down the empty road, hearing nothing but the relentless rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. A random car cruises past, its headlights slicing through the dark. Even in your most exhausted moments, you have to stay awake. Danger loves to creep into the blind spots you forget to watch. Emma pays no attention to the hum of that passing engine. She is completely hollowed out, wanting nothing more than to lock her door and disappear from the world. But as she steps off the curb into an empty intersection, pure chaos erupts. Blinding white headlights explode out of the darkness to her left. Tires scream violently against the slick asphalt, and a massive black sedan is hurtling straight toward her. Emma snaps her head around, her eyes wide with sheer terror, but her frozen legs refuse to obey. She tries to scramble back, but the wet road betrays her, sending her crashing hard onto her side. In that agonizing split second, she braces for the absolute end. But suddenly, a powerful hand grips her arm. Salvation often arrives right when destruction feels certain. You and I know what it means to hit rock bottom, but picture this. Freezing rain falls in heavy, blinding sheets as Emma is violently thrown to the wet pavement. She hits the concrete hard, right beside the stranger who just shoved her from the path of a speeding car. Metal crushes against a parked truck. Shattered glass rains down, and alarms scream into the cold night. Lying there gasping, her ears ringing with the noise of pure survival, she looks up. The man leans in close, warning her to stay down. Blinking through the storm, she tries to map his features. It brings us to a harsh truth we all face. You never truly know whose hand will pull you from the fire when your world suddenly collapses into the dark. The stranger, hovering over her, is a rugged shadow of a man, carrying a sharp jawline and a jagged scar right above his eye. But the shock of his face hits Emma far harder than the wet concrete. She knows him. He is one of the elite shadow enforcers employed by Carver International. Before she can even force out a word, he is already speaking into his radio. He calls in the hit and run, confirming she is secure. Then comes the truth that freezes her blood completely. The driver fled, he tells her, and this was no random accident. The realization cuts deep. She was the absolute target. It serves as a quiet reminder of how life operates. Sometimes the people fading into the background are the exact onesies, keeping you breathing. The enforcer does not waste a single breath. His eyes lock onto the black sedan, tearing away through the rain-washed streets quickly, reading off its tinted windows and plates. Hanging up, he looks down at her with a dead serious intensity, asking if she has the strength to stand. Pure panic surges through her veins. She demands to know why he is following her. Without missing a beat, David admits he is acting on a direct order from herself. He extends a scarred hand, warning her they must vanish immediately because that car was sent to kill her. It is a terrifying lesson in consequence. When you start digging up buried secrets to do what is right, you will attract dangerous enemies. But the right allies will stand by your side. Emma can barely process the violent madness unfolding around her. A stranger just tried to end her life on a freezing street, only for her to be saved at the final second by a phantom bodyguard. And the most agonizing detail? This protector was sent by Nicholas Carver, the very man who ruthlessly fired her from his office barely an hour ago. David pulls her up from the icy pavement, gripping her arm as if he knows her legs might fail. Her mind is a total blur, trapped in a paralyzing wave of shock. Life has a peculiar way of teaching us its hardest lessons. Things are rarely what they appear to be on the surface, and sometimes the person you are convinced is your absolute worst enemy is actually acting as your truest shield. Imagine the raw agony she feels right now. Her knees are bruised and bleeding, and her body shakes violently from the freezing storm and the lingering terror of the crash. Without saying a word, David sheds his heavy jacket and wraps it tightly around her trembling shoulders. He guides her down a forgotten, pitch-black alleyway, where a battered gray sedan idles quietly in the shadows. This is no glossy corporate ride. It is a complete ghost car. He ushers her inside and slides behind the wheel, refusing to even switch on the headlights as they slip into the bleeding city traffic. It brings a hard truth about survival into focus. Sometimes, you have to strip away all your pride and comfort and simply fade into the shadows to live. Another day. As the broken heater finally breathes a little warmth into the freezing cabin, Emma sits trembling, trying to untangle the nightmare. She whispers into the dark, asking if he is absolutely certain the crash was intentional and why they are hiding in this ruined car. David keeps his eyes locked on the rearview mirror, hunting for any sign of a tail. His voice remains perfectly steady. He confirms it was a planned hit, explaining that this burner vehicle keeps them off the grid, while the enemy thinks she is in an ambulance. Emma realizes it has to be the financial report she uncovered. It leaves us with a heavy lesson. Speaking the truth demands immense courage, because exposing the dark will inevitably paint a target directly on your back. The scattered pieces of this violent puzzle are finally snapping into place. David meets her eyes in the mirror, his gaze sharp and calculating. He explains that finding those missing funds made her an immediate threat to a traitor hidden deep within the company ranks. The bosses know a mole is bleeding them dry, they just lack a name. Drained and hollow, she leans against the cold glass to ask the hardest question. If Carver knew she was a target, why did he publicly destroy her career? David shakes his head. It was a desperate diversion to make the real enemy drop their guard. It proves that in our chaotic world, the deepest acts of protection can often look exactly like the cruelest forms of abandonment on the surface. You and I know what it means to hide our true motives, but watch what happens here. David reveals Carver never intended to leave her walking alone in the dark. Emma stares at him, her chest tight, realizing this man had been shadowing her the moment she left the building. David confesses there were 3 other guards mapping her route home. She was wrapped in an invisible layer of protection the entire time, but then his voice drops low. The enemy moved faster than anyone anticipated, proving just how close she was to exposing the mastermind. It is a beautiful, painful lesson about trust. Even when you feel entirely abandoned out in the cold rain, there might be unseen hands working tirelessly to keep you totally safe from harm. Emma feels the air thinning in her lungs, terrified by the suffocating weight of the danger closing in around her. When she finally asks where they are disappearing to, David casually mentions they are driving straight to the boss's private estate, hidden outside the city limits. It is a literal fortress, crawling with elite guards and private doctors. Exhausted to her core, she practically begs to just go back to the quiet of her own apartment. David shuts it down with cold, undeniable logic. He tells her that her home is the very first trap a hitman would set. Emma freezes, knowing he is absolutely right. It is a sobering thought. In moments of profound crisis, the place where we feel the most comfortable is often the most dangerous place to be. The beaten sedan rolls down an isolated, dead quiet road on the edge of the city, stopping as a massive iron gate slowly parts in the mist. It looks like something pulled from a midnight dream. A sprawling, fog-drenched estate rises up like a fortress, holding back the storm, with warm golden light spilling from heavy glass windows. It feels miles away from the brutal violence they just escaped. David kills the engine and steps out to open her door, quietly telling her, this is the only true safe haven left. As Emma steps onto the driveway, trembling from adrenaline and cold, she realizes she is crossing into a hidden world. This proves that reaching the absolute breaking point is often the only way to discover a totally new kind of inner strength. Before David can even raise his hand to knock, the grand doors swing open, washing Emma in a blinding wave of golden heat. The sudden warmth cuts straight through the biting storm, but what truly takes her breath away is the man standing in the center of the vast hall. Nicholas Carver. Yet, the icy, untouchable executive is entirely gone. He stands there in a soaked white shirt, his dark hair dripping wet, as if he had been tearing through the storm himself. His eyes carry an agonizing, burning intensity we have never witnessed before. He closes the distance in rapid, heavy strides. It goes to show that beneath the most perfectly polished armor, people often carry a deeply fragile heart that cares far more than words could ever explain. Stick with me here, because this is the exact moment everything shifts. Emma stands paralyzed, drenched in rain and completely overwhelmed by the chaos of the night. Carver stops mere inches away from her. He scans her bruised, bleeding knees and her wide, haunted eyes with a desperate, searching intensity. When he finally asks if she is hurt, his voice is fractured, rough, and entirely breathless. Hearing this untouchable man sound so completely terrified for her shakes her to her absolute core. She barely manages to whisper that she is okay. Carver hesitates for a fleeting second before letting his hand rest gently on her freezing shoulder. It teaches us something profound. The strongest people are often the ones most terrified of losing what they cherish. The housekeeper bursts into the room, her hands full of thick towels and a heavy robe. Carver shifts back into his commanding element, barking harsh orders to get Emma settled by the fire, demanding blankets and dialing his private doctor. But then, the armor fractures again. He turns slowly, meeting Em with a gaze that holds terrifying regret, and he actually apologizes. Emma just stares at him, her chest heaving. A bitter, jagged laugh tears out of her throat. She is trembling, partly from the freezing rain, but mostly from unadulterated rage. He admits he took a massive gamble that broke her pride, claiming it was his only option. It is a heavy truth we all face. Even the most desperate intentions leave scars, and real forgiveness must be earned. Let us look closely here, because the illusion completely shatters. Nicholas stands before her, jaw locked tight enough to grind stone. He tells her the brutal truth. He had to make the shadows believe she was utterly broken, just to draw the wolves into the light. Emma is not buying a single word. Her fingernails bite into her palms, a heartbeat away from drawing blood, as she whispers he wanted her hollowed out. Nick steps dangerously close, his voice dropping to a desperate gravel, swearing he only crushed her spirit to keep her breathing. It is a terrifying paradox we sometimes learn the hard way in life. The very hands that drag you away from the edge of the cliff are often the exact ones that leave the deepest, darkest bruises on your skin. For the first time, the untouchable king of this empire is crumbling. His permanent mask of frost is slipping, replaced by a suffocating panic. Watching him look terrified sends a colder chill down her spine than the crash ever could. Her voice trembles, asking why her life matters when she is just a disposable name on a ledger. Nick squeezes his eyes shut, waging a silent war in his chest. When he speaks, his voice is a broken ruin, insisting she is more than a passing face. But the confession is too heavy. He instantly builds his walls back up, calling Marina to escort her away. It teaches us a quiet truth. Real emotion always bleeds through the heaviest armor when the stakes are life and death, no matter how hard one tries to bury it. Emma walks behind the older woman in silence, her mind spiraling from the emotional whiplash. The cavernous halls of the mansion stretch out before her, holding secrets she cannot guess. Yet one truth rings clear. Nicholas is a labyrinth of a man, and that wildfire in his eyes is a danger she is unprepared to face. Later, she sits numbly in a grand mahogany room, a heavy wool blanket over her trembling shoulders. A cup of tea turns cold on the table. The private doctor came and went, leaving pills behind, but her real agony is untouchable by medicine. It reminds us of a bitter reality. Physical scrapes fade away in time, but the lingering trauma of being manipulated as a helpless pawn will echo in a person's mind for years. Marina leaves, stranding Emma in a suffocating quiet. Outside the glass, rain falls in endless sheets, mirroring the storm in her mind. I want you and I to trace this back to where it began. She stares into the flames, returning to the moment she spotted the discrepancy. It started as a phantom number, a few $1,000s hidden in a cryptic ledger. She polished the thread. A horrifying picture emerged. Tiny fractures in the accounts were bleeding out a mountain of wealth. Thinking she was doing the right thing, she handed the explosive report directly to him. The lesson is terrifying, but essential. Uncovering the hidden truth can sometimes make you a savior. But more often than not, it simply paints a glowing target on your back. The realization hits her like a physical blow. That financial report is the exact reason she was thrown out and hunted. The pieces finally click together. She was never the brilliant pioneer who found the missing money, and Nicholas was never a blind fool. He already knew. He was deep in the shadows, hunting his demons when she stumbled into his war zone. The brass handle clicks, and Nick steps back into the room. He still carries the suffocating gravity of an executioner. He sinks into the leather chair, his gaze dangerously calm. In a low murmur, he asks if she has put the puzzle together. Emma turns to ice. It is a sobering reminder. Never assume you hold the whole picture, because someone else is always quietly playing a darker game behind the curtain. She watches him for a long minute, the silence stretching tight before she offers a shallow nod. Her voice is a whisper when she admits those phantom transfers were no accident. It was a calculated, bloodless robbery. Nick leans back into the shadows, his profile glowing against the firelight. He confesses he has been hunting these ghosts for 3 agonizing months. The architect of the theft is a phantom, moving millions through offshore shells, keeping every theft beneath the detection threshold. Emma leans forward, completely pulled into his dark gravity. This reveals a powerful law of survival. True patience is a deadly weapon. Sometimes you must sit quietly and let a thief believe they have won, only to follow their footprints back to the source. Emma demands to know if he has a name for the phantom pulling the strings. Nick stares back, his expression detached. He admits the list was cut down to 3 faces, but he lacked the killing strike. He needed a pure outsider to stumble upon the fraud. Let you and I pause here, because this is where the betrayal sinks in. Emma gestures to herself, dread washing over her as she realizes she was the sacrificial lamb. Nick does not flinch. He coldly confesses he handed her the files, banking on her relentless mind to trip the wire. She wants to tear the room apart, but her chest just feels hollow. She condemns him for letting her wander blindfolded into a slaughterhouse. It is a harsh tragedy. Often, the brilliance you pride yourself on makes you the perfect pawn. He defends his cruelty, explaining that a warning would have tainted her reaction. Her terror had to be authentic, because genuine panic forces the guilty to make foolish moves. Emma glares at him. She spits back, asking if a foolish move means hiring an assassin to run her down on a wet highway. Nick tightens his jaw, his knuckles turning stark white. For a fleeting second, his pride falls away, and he admits his failure. He deeply underestimated the desperation of a cornered thief. In that heavy moment, the room shifts. Emma no longer sees an invincible king. She sees an isolated man fighting a war in the dark, watching his empire rot from the inside. It reveals a grim reality. Even the strongest men will freely gamble with innocent souls when cornered. It hits her with terrifying clarity. She was the singular spark that detonated a massive conspiracy. Emma draws a slow breath, pulling her shattered nerves together. She leans back, locking her eyes onto his, and asks the dangerous question. What is the final move? Nick watches her, his gaze like a frozen lake calm on the surface, holding devastating currents below. He speaks in a lethal whisper, vowing to dismantle the traitor entirely. But his focus has shifted. His priority now is ensuring she survives the night. Emma remains silent, but a hard, unbreakable resolve settles over her features. You and I are witnessing a quiet transformation here. You rarely choose the brutal chaos that crashes into your life, but you alone decide how you stand up and face the storm. The silence stretches until Nick outlines the cold mechanics of his strategy. Dragging her name through the mud was never a punishment. Her financial report was the final nail he needed. If he had celebrated her mind, the phantom would have vanished into thin air. Emma sits frozen, her stare cutting through him like glass. Nick holds his ground, his voice an unbroken rhythm. He explains that the enemy needed to see her publicly broken. It was the only way to make the hunter lower his rifle. Emma closes her eyes, exhaling a breath, colder than the storm outside his window. She whispers the unforgivable truth. He turned her into breathing bait. It is a bitter pill to swallow. In the ruthless theater of power, the king will always choose victory over a single bruised heart. The man nods, admitting to the monstrous scheme. He confesses she was the bait, but insists she was never unprotected. He swears he had his best ghosts tracking her, keeping his top enforcer positioned in her shadow. He tells her she was never in true peril. It is the worst thing he could have said. Emma fractures entirely. The grief and terror she swallowed all night violently erupts. She screams she was mere inches from becoming roadkill beneath a black sedan. If his enforcer had hesitated for a single breath, she would be a bloody memory on the pavement. And he dares to call that safe? Nick absorbs the beating in silence, his eyes heavy with crushing guilt. It proves a haunting truth. A man can build the perfect cage, but he can never truly control the chaotic streets. Let you and I step into the heavy, suffocating air of this room together. Nick stands by the window, the posture of a crime boss entirely broken by the terrible weight of his own gamble. He confesses he pushed the boundaries, his rough voice haunted by the mental image of Emma, bleeding out on the concrete. Emma shoots up from her chair, her entire frame trembling with a raw, unpolished rage. How can he claim the role of protector after tossing her to the wolves in front of the entire crime family? Nick takes a slow, cautious step forward, swearing she was never just a disposable pawn. He only used her because she was the one brilliant spark that could blind the traitor. Remember this simple life lesson. When you treat loyal people like expendable chess pieces, you can never be surprised when they finally flip the entire board. A hollow laugh escapes Emma, shattering the quiet room. She locks onto his gaze, stripping away his underworld armor. "You did not gamble with my life," she whispers, "but what about the blind trust I handed you?" For the first time, the untouchable boss has absolutely nothing to say. Emma backs away, treating the space around him as poison. She reveals her most painful delusion. She genuinely believed that beneath his reputation, he valued her relentless grit. She thought her endless work would earn a genuine seat at his table. Instead, she was merely a wrench in his violent machine. Her voice drops to a thin whisper. "Here is a simple life lesson. The most agonizing wounds do not come from the blades of enemies, but from the mentors we foolishly dared to trust." The fireplace roars, yet the emotional chill between them is absolute. Emma refuses to hold back her pain, exposing the terrifying truth that he turned her into a walking target. Our ruthless boss simply stares at the floor. The shadows under his eyes reveal a man exhausted by his own cycle of violence. He promises to fix this mess with action, not words. But Emma cuts him down with a voice like cracked ice. She demands he remember the panic he felt when she was nearly killed. If he cares, he will never pull a stunt like that again. Then comes her final boundary, a line drawn in stone. Listen closely to this simple life lesson. When someone shows you their true colors, believe them the very first time, and never let empty apologies paint over the harsh reality. She turns and walks out, leaving the feared crime boss alone by the dying fire. The heavy thud of her door echoes down that dim hallway like a long, exhausted sigh. Nick designed this room specifically for her, and its perfection is deeply suffocating. Cream sheets folded with precision, soft amber lighting, and the scent of crushed lavender. It feels like a beautifully crafted trap. Emma is not sleeping tonight. She pulls a blanket around her shoulders, curling into a chair by the window. She stares into the pitch black garden, her mind burning with the sting of betrayal. It brings us to a simple life lesson. A golden cage is still a cage, and no amount of luxury can ever make up for the agonizing reality of being played. You and I must pause and sit with the absolute whiplash this young woman is enduring. Just 36 hours ago, Emma was burning the midnight oil, desperate to prove her worth. Instead, she was thrown to the wolves to force a rat out of hiding. The cruelest twist of this psychological warfare? Nick always had men watching her. He never intended for her to die, but he needed the traitor to bite. Now, her mind is a tangled mess. Should she run away, back to the crushing weight of empty bank accounts? The terrifying shadow of her mother's medical bills still looms over her every thought. Here is a simple life lesson for the dark hours. Sometimes the hardest choices are not about justice. When your family's survival is on the line, your own ego has to quietly step aside. We must examine the desperate life she escaped. A leaking apartment, and nights spent suffocating under the terror of poverty. Nick Carver is a dangerous man, but he represents her only lifeline out of the gutter. Staying in his world means navigating a labyrinth of blood and lies. Emma is a creature of logic. She trusts numbers because math never betrays you. In the dark, she realizes a staggering truth. She is the only one brilliant enough to untangle the financial web that even the boss could not crack. She rattled a king. Remember this simple life lesson. Your deepest vulnerability in one world might just be your greatest weapon in another. Do not underestimate your own quiet brilliance. Sometimes, being the smartest person in the room is exactly what makes you untouchable. It is a beautiful, agonizing tragedy. Just by existing, she forced this ruthless monarch to drop his iron shield. She peered through his armor, proving he is not just a heartless ghost. Is that why she remains frozen in this bedroom? Deep down, she senses that this terrifying man is profoundly alone. Outside, the rain beats down on the glass, mirroring her chaotic heart. She remembers the shattered look in Nick's eyes when she screamed her pain at him. He offered no defensive poison, no arrogant excuses. He simply swallowed her fury, letting the crushing guilt take hold. He knew his sins. Take this simple life lesson to heart. True accountability is never about building a fortress of excuses. It is about owning your mistakes and taking the absolute brunt of the storm. The question hanging in the dark is whether fractured trust can ever be rebuilt. Emma rises, walking slowly toward the glowing screen of her laptop. With trembling fingers, she boots up the hidden backup files she secretly preserved. This is a master class in quiet rebellion. If she runs, her story fades to dust. But if she chooses to remain in this suffocating empire, the dynamics must change. She refuses to play the blind pawn ever again. She will become the hand that moves the pieces. As the blue light reflects in her eyes, the tears dry up, replaced by a cold resolve. Here is a simple, meaningful life lesson. When you realize the game was rigged from the start, you do not just surrender. You study the board, flip the table, and learn to play with ruthless precision. By the time morning breaks, the rain has faded, leaving a bruised light in her room. Emma sits up, but the terror in her chest has morphed into something different. She found her psychological armor in the dark. She rests on the edge of the mattress when the heavy door creaks open. It is Nick, but the ruthless predator of the night is entirely gone. He walks in quietly, holding a steaming cup of coffee, his eyes carrying a fragile, desperate gentleness. The bitter war between them has finally paused. Listen to me, because this is a simple life lesson we all need. A new dawn does not just scatter the shadows. It offers a profound chance to completely rewrite a broken dynamic, if only you have the courage to leave the bitter ashes behind. He wears a crisp, unbuttoned white shirt, his hair still damp. For a fragile second, the terrifying mask of the boss completely vanishes. He is just a man, drowning in a deep ocean of regret. He sets the warm mug down, pulls up a chair, and waits in the silence, handing her all the power in the room. Emma watches him, her guard raised, but the blistering hatred from midnight has burned down to embers. Nick takes a shaky breath, and his rough voice is heartbreakingly soft. He admits he spent the entire night haunted by the reality that she almost died for his sins. Here is a simple life lesson. True vulnerability is the ultimate strength. When you break someone's world, when you the tough exterior, your honest regret is the only real path to redemption. The words die in his throat. He stares at her, and the raw agony in his gaze makes Emma's breath hitch. The boss does not know how to beg for forgiveness, but his silence speaks volumes. She wraps her trembling fingers around the hot mug, grounding herself before asking the question tearing her apart. Did he ever consider that she never wanted a role in his bloody underworld? Nick absorbs the blow. He holds her gaze and softly confesses that he has no right to ask for mercy. But the moment she cracked those ledgers, she painted a massive target on her own back. Let this be a simple life lesson. Ignorance is a protective shield. Once your eyes are open to a dark truth, you can never look away, and it will pull you into a war you never intended to fight. Emma sits frozen as the tragic reality sets in. His armor is shattering. The puzzle pieces click together. This was never just about missing money. He is hunting a ghost inside his own house. Nick slumps back, exhaustion radiating from his bones, revealing a truth that stops her heart. The rat destroying his empire is Marcus Lane, the man who stood by his side for 20 years. A staggering betrayal. Emma's voice shakes as she accuses him of using her as bait. Nick leans in, his tone thick with desperation. He had to publicly cast her out so the wolves would believe she was unprotected. You and I must hold on to this simple life lesson. Keep your walls high. The most lethal blade never comes from a sworn enemy. It is almost always held by the person you trusted the most. The air in the room grows impossibly heavy, suffocating under the weight of Nick coming clean. He breaks the silence, admitting he never left Emma alone. He had David and 3 armed ghosts, tracking her every single move. Emma searches his face for deception, but all she finds is an exhausting, crushing guilt. The fight simply drains out of her bones. She lets out a long breath and asks what comes next. Nick moves close, sitting on the very edge of her mattress. He promises she is safe, but admits he desperately needs her mind to survive this coming war. It reminds us of a hard truth. True protection rarely feels like a warm embrace. Most of the time, it is someone moving quietly through the dark, keeping the monsters at bay so you can finally rest. He hands over a fragile piece of his battered soul. Nick confesses that his entire life taught him never to trust anyone, yet she makes him want to completely shatter that rule. For a paranoid king of the criminal underworld, that kind of vulnerability is a staggering admission. He respects her because she absolutely refuses to cower. She looks the devil in the eye and demands the unvarnished truth. Emma cannot help the soft smile that breaks across her tired face. She jokes about how he constantly drives her to the brink of madness, only to pull her back in. Nick just raises an eyebrow, his rigid shoulders dropping in pure relief that she is staying. It reminds us of a simple reality. Courage is undeniably magnetic. If you want the respect of those who walk in shadows, you must stand your ground. A genuine laugh escapes her lips, completely free of its usual bitter edge. She asks if this gentle treatment is his way of making up for the nightmare. Nick does not even try to hide it, offering a simple nod. In that quiet space, the deep wounds between them start stitching together. The scene shifts, finding Emma alone in a high-tech office buried deep within his fortress. The cool, blue light of the monitors washes over her face. She is totally dialed in. Every ounce of hesitation is gone, replaced by a fierce hunger for the coming war. You and I know how that feels. Sometimes the best way to heal from a blow is to take all that chaotic pain and channel it straight into your purpose. Turn your agony into absolute focus, and watch how quickly you take over the room. This is the exact moment the tide turns. Emma is finished playing the helpless pawn in a brutal game she did not choose. Armed with encrypted files from the private server, she transforms into a relentless hunter. She tears through the financial reports, and the ugly truth spills out. We are talking deep rot, slush funds dressed up as investments, and ghost accounts tied to overseas shadows. It is a masterpiece of deception, but Emma catches a subtle rhythm. Massive transfer out of a Miami brand and funneling directly into a locked-down vault in Luxembourg. Here is something to remember when the chips are down. Never underestimate someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. They will also see the hidden details that everyone else was simply too comfortable to notice. The account name is scrubbed, but humans always leave a fingerprint. Emma zeroes in on a tiny, hidden string of numbers. It is the exact code Marcus Lane uses for his corporate travel. A fatal error. Her pulse quickens as she pulls up his travel logs, laying them beside the cash drops. Every time Marcus boarded a flight to a country with 0 extradition laws, that ghost account spiked with heavy withdrawals. Isolated, these numbers look like standard business. Bound together, they equal millions vanishing into thin air. Emma sits back, the brutal reality settling in her bones. This was never an outside attack. It is a rotting inside job. It just goes to show you a universal law. Unchecked greed will always leave a paper trail, leading right back to the rat. Marcus engineered an absolute masterpiece of theft. A machine this perfect requires blind trust. Emma grabs a pen and starts mapping the betrayal, color-coding the dates and offshore drops. With every line she draws, the horror crystallizes. Marcus is not just stealing pocket change. He is funding an entire shadow empire right under Nixon's nose. In this dark underworld, touching the king's treasury is a death sentence that drags everyone down. Emma leans back, staring at the tangled web she just exposed. A wild rush of fury and pure victory washes over her. She has the bulletproof right-hand man, dead to rights. Let this be a lesson for the overly proud. The bigger the ego driving the deception, the harder the final fall when the truth inevitably catches up to you. Moving with cold precision, she prints the evidence, stacking the pages into a folder. Each step down, that marble hallway feels like a slow countdown. Down in the dimly lit library, Nick looks like a ghost, worn thin by the unending war. But the moment Emma steps through the doors, holding that file like a loaded weapon, his posture shifts. The apex predator wakes up. She does not speak a single word. She just drops the folder onto his desk. Nick opens it. The silence stretches as his eyes tear through the pages, his expression hardening into cold stone. When he finally looks up, his eyes are a tragic collision of fierce pride and a terrifying dread. Proving once again, the unvarnished truth is always a heavy burden to hand over to someone you actually care about. Emma holds his gaze, her voice perfectly steady as she drops the hammer. She tells him she found the rat. It is Marcus. Nick goes terrifyingly still. Time simply stops in that shadowy room. Finally, a single nod breaks his freeze. He tells her she did her job perfectly, but now she needs to let him handle the fallout. Nick's fingers slowly trace the charts, looking like a man bleeding out from a blade he never saw coming. The quiet is agonizing, pierced only by the sharp snap of turning pages. Emma stays rooted to the floor, waiting for the earth to crack open. Here is the bitter truth we all learn eventually. Uncovering a massive betrayal always demands a heavy psychological toll, and burying a broken trust is never a clean job. She braces for the shouting, but Nick is paralyzed by a terrifying calm. Suddenly, he slams the folder shut, sending a silver pen skittering across the floor. The icy controlled boss is gone. He stares right through her, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, demanding to know if she is certain. Emma anchors her feet. She tells him every transaction was verified 3 times over. The encrypted flows perfectly mirror the phantom travel logs. There is no margin for error. Marcus has been bleeding them dry for 8 months, burying his theft in mundane costs. He truly believed he was untouchable. Let us look at this timeless human tragedy. The people who think they are the absolute smartest guys in the room always end up tripping over their own massive arrogance. Now, the harsh reality of Nick's world reveals itself. He grabs the file, turning toward the bookshelf behind his desk. He pulls a specific spine, and with a heavy groan, a hidden door slides open to expose a dark stairwell. He orders Emma to follow. She hesitates for a heartbeat before descending. There is no dungeon down here. It is a high-tech nerve center, humming with live video feeds and global maps. Nick marches straight to a veteran named Paul, slapping the file onto his console. His voice is totally devoid of emotion. He gives Paul exactly 30 minutes to tear into the system logs and prove Emma right. It is a harsh reality to swallow. Trust is a beautiful concept in civilian life, but in this savage business, cold verification is the only thing that keeps you breathing. Nick is already 3 steps ahead. He demands Marcus's exact coordinates in 10 minutes flat. Paul does not waste a breath on questions. He pulls down his headset and goes to war on his keyboard. Nick slowly turns back to Emma. There is a dark respect in his eyes now. He tells her he thought he was hiring a numbers girl, not a ruthless hunter willing to drag an empire's secrets into the light. He warns her that she is swimming with the sharks. Emma does not blink. She says she made her choice the night he dragged her into this hell. Now she is staying on her own terms. Right then, Paul spins around. The numbers match perfectly. Marcus is at the West Side office. The lesson here: no matter how deep you bury it, your hidden past will always violently collide with your present. Nick does not flinch at the confirmation. His voice drops into a chilling command. He orders Paul to deploy Alex and Team 6. The instructions are brutal. Marcus does not make it out of that building a free man. They are to snatch him quietly and drag him to the northern isolation site. No witnesses, just pure efficiency. The room erupts into chaos, and Emma finally feels the true weight of the underworld. This is a life where one betrayal ends with you vanishing into the earth. Nick looks at her, his mask slipping for a second. He offers her an out, telling her she does not need to witness the blood. Emma holds her ground. She refuses to look away. Sometimes, we just have to watch the brutal karma play out ourselves. Closing your eyes to a dark reality will never keep you safe. Listen closely, because you and I both know exactly how these tragedies unfold. Nick closes the distance, locking eyes with Emma to deliver a terrifying promise. This was never simply about Marcus skimming cash. That traitor put Emma directly in the line of fire. Crossing a sacred boundary, Nick refuses to forgive. His voice drops to a heavy whisper. Marcus is finished. Hours later, dawn breaks over the estate. It is swallowed by an icy fog and the kind of suffocating quiet that only pure power can buy. Nick stands in his office, his face carved from stone, preparing to do the unthinkable. It leaves us with a hard truth to carry through life. True loyalty might be a rare ghost, but betrayal is a debt that will always demand to be paid in full. Emma is already awake, gripping her coffee and staring into the thick morning fog. When Nick enters looking like the angel of death, she instantly knows the hour has arrived. He lays out the cold facts. Marcus is on his way, totally blind to the trap, believing they are just discussing territory. Emma sets her mug down. Her pulse races, but she firmly insists on staying in the room. Nick shuts it down immediately, refusing to let her witness the coming violence. But she stands her ground, reminding him that she was the one nearly destroyed by this betrayal. She earned her right to be there. There is a powerful lesson here. If you ever try to bury someone in the dark, you better be absolutely certain they do not know how to claw their way back to the surface. Emma holds his gaze, demanding a front row seat to the fallout. Nick watches her, his expression darkening into something heartbreaking. He steps closer, asking a question that hangs heavy in the air. If she watches what he is about to do, will she ever be able to look at him the same way? He warns her the man waiting for Marcus, well, he has no soul. It is a caged beast he has spent decades holding back, and he refuses to let that shadow infect her. Emma stares at him, finally recognizing the crushing weight he carries just to keep them safe. Still, she holds her ground. It brings us to a harsh but true lesson. Sometimes in life, there are certain fires you simply have to walk straight through if you ever want to come out clean on the other side. Emma tells him, without a tremble in her voice, that she is stronger than he realizes. Nick agrees, but counters with a heavy truth. Just because you can carry a terrible burden does not mean you should. He insists on bearing this sin alone. He brought Marcus into the family, so he must close the book. Suddenly, the crunch of gravel and a slamming door shatters the quiet. A dark SUV waits in the driveway. The traitor has arrived. Nick checks his watch, his face shifting into a blank mask. He orders Emma to stay put, offering one last look of deep sorrow and cold iron. He will return when the silence is permanent. Here is something we all learn the hard way. The only way to fix a massive mistake is to face the ugly truth head-on, no matter the cost. Before turning away, Nick steps close and gently cups her cheek. He traces her features like a man trying to memorize the light, before descending into total darkness. He promises that nobody will ever breathe a threat in her direction again. Emma is trembling, yet she looks this hardened kingpin dead in the eye. "Do not end this man over me," she whispers. "Do it because he is a snake. There is a profound lesson in that for all of us. Never let pure revenge drive your most permanent decisions, or you will lose your own soul in the process." Nick freezes, then nods slowly. He tells her he only acts on principle, and Marcus broke the final rule. He walks out, leaving Emma alone in the silence of the house, listening to her own heartbeat while the executioner goes to work. You and I know the aftermath is where the real ghost story begins. The heavy oak door opens without a sound, but the exhausted thud of boots gives him away. Emma feels her stomach drop the second Nick steps into the pale light. He wears a fresh black shirt, but the cuffs cling damply to his wrists. He scrubbed his hands in a hurry. There is no blood on him, but his eyes are entirely hollow, as if his humanity was left behind in that basement. Emma stays perfectly quiet. Sometimes, giving someone the grace of silence is the smartest move you can make when they are walking on broken glass. She watches this giant man sit heavily in the chair across from her. He stares blankly at the empty space between them and whispers two quiet words. It is done. Just two simple words, spoken without a trace of emotion. But they hit Emma like a physical blow. She does not ask for the gruesome details or what kind of wreckage he left behind in that room. She simply looks into his hollow eyes and accepts the reality. Marcus is gone. There are no second chances in this brutal underworld. It forces her to swallow the bitter pill of the life she has chosen. Listen closely, because this is a heavy truth. The darkest choices we make always come with a massive weight, and you have to drag that burden forever. Nick sits there rubbing his temples, fighting a silent war in his own mind to justify erasing a man he once trusted. There is no visible mess, but Emma swears she can smell the cold rust of sorrow clinging to his skin. Emma pushes her chair back and walks slowly to his side. She does not bombard him with panicked questions or pull him from his dark thoughts. Instead, she rests her hand gently on his broad shoulder, offering a quiet anchor in his storm. Being a steady presence for someone whose world is spinning is a powerful lesson in true loyalty. Nick slowly looks up, and the terrifying mask of the ruthless boss shatters. Right behind his eyes is a desperate, damaged man. He reaches up and grips her hand, pulling her down beside him until they share the exact same breath. He spares her the brutal facts, and she demands nothing, yet she feels the violent tremor in his grip. This was never just business. It was honestly the agonizing rupture of a brotherhood that had to end in tragedy. The quiet in the room is suffocating, heavy with grief, until Nick finally breaks. When he speaks, his voice is raw, stripped down to gravel and pain. He confesses how much he despises leaving her alone, and how he hates that she had to witness the monster he tries so desperately to hide. Emma does not flinch. She rests her palm flat against his chest, right over his racing heart, and offers him salvation. She tells him she did not see a monster today. She saw a man doing whatever it took to keep his promise. Reminding someone of their worth when they are standing at rock bottom is a profound life lesson you should never forget. Nick stares at her like a drowning man finding the shore. He drops his heavy head against hers, finally releasing a ragged breath he had been trapping inside. She does not pull away from the cold reality of his life. Instead, she squeezes his hand tighter. In that tiny motion, Nick realizes he has found something rare. Emma does not need grim explanations or the brutal logic of his underworld. She only needs to know the man beside her honors his word and that he came back. Finding a partner who can look at your darkest parts without trying to fix your soul is a beautiful lesson in love. They sit together as the afternoon bleeds away. The fading light casts long shadows across the stone floor, perfectly matching the deep exhaustion settling into their bones. Nick keeps her hand locked securely in his. He holds her not as a possession, but as a lifeline, anchoring them both to the earth. After surviving such a bitter storm, I want you to picture the heavy stillness of this moment. Slowly, Emma leans to the side, resting her head against his tense shoulder. It is a subtle gesture, yet it speaks volumes about her devotion. Nick remains perfectly still, letting his cheek rest against her hair. The quiet intimacy is staggering. She is entirely consumed by this dangerous life, and the exit doors have been permanently locked. Eventually, she asks the question that has been haunting the room. Does he ever just get exhausted? Constantly looking over his shoulder, forced to play judge and executioner. It is a brutal lesson for all of us. The relentless grind of toxic life will eventually hollow you out. Nick stays quiet for a long time. Then, Finally dropping his heavy armor, he breathes out a simple, heartbreaking yes. Nick turns his head, his voice heavy with a bleak reality. He explains that when you wear the crown in the underworld, a single flicker of hesitation brings the empire crashing down. Exhaustion is not a luxury he can afford. He confesses that he never asked for the violence this cursed life chose him. When you stand in the center of a hurricane, you only have two choices. You plant your feet into the mud, or you get swept away. That is a hard survival lesson we all face when the world goes dark. Stepping up and owning your burden is the only way through the storm. Emma sits beside him, speechless. She is overwhelmed by an aching respect for the man. In a brutal world, where one wrong breath means an early grave, true trust is a treasure bought only with blood. Welcome back to the Midnight Hour. Today, you and I are going to unpack a story about the heavy cost of power. Let us look at Nick. He commands a criminal empire so cold it would make a cartel boss shiver. Yet, strangely, a tiny sliver of his humanity survives. He protects Emma, even as his daily life spirals into pure violence. Across a smoke-filled room, she asks a simple question that hits him like a bullet. Has he ever trusted anyone just for being a good person? Nick gives a slow, exhausted smile. He had a brother in arms once, but that man walked away before the underworld could swallow him whole. There is a quiet truth here. Sometimes abandoning the fire is the only way to avoid burning alive. Emma sees it then. That old betrayal is the exact reason he locked his heart in a steel cage the moment she arrived. The steel walls are down, and the bridge is burned. Emma confesses. She once believed life was neatly sliced into pure heroes and wicked villains. But watching Nick operate in the blind spots of the city broke that illusion. The world spins in bruised, muddy shades of gray, and sometimes doing wrong is the only way to wake up tomorrow. Nick just stares, completely paralyzed. She admits she will never praise his cruelty, but she understands the mechanics of it, and her fear is entirely gone. The frost in his gaze shatters. He reaches out, brushing her cheek with fingers stained by a recent kill, telling her he never asked for absolution. Real love is not about clapping for someone's sins. It is about holding your ground when the lights finally cut out. Nick admits a raw truth. He just needs her standing there, the single person capable of breaking down the iron laws he lived his whole life by. Emma whispers she is not leaving, but the game has to change right now. No more half-truths, not one buried secret, and he is never allowed to shut her out again. There is a profound lesson sitting right here. If you want a relationship to outlast the storm, you have to draw a hard line in the dirt. Nick gives a slow, heavy nod, sealing a vow he would rather bleed out than break. He leans in, pressing a soft kiss against her forehead, pulling her into a quiet warmth she never realized she was hungry for. Emma finally finds her anchor. The Mafia world is a walking death trap, but she is ready to trust a ruthless king and let herself truly fall. Dawn light cuts through the heavy velvet drapes, and Emma steps into the study radiating an entirely different energy. She wears the ice-cold stillness of a newly crowned queen. Nick is up early, staring at his bitter coffee, while his soldiers wash the pavement outside. He asks quietly if she managed to get any sleep. She answers by slamming a thick, heavy dossier straight onto his mahogany desk. She locks eyes with the devil himself, demanding total, unrestricted access to the entire criminal operation. Refusing to ride as a passenger in your own life is a choice that rewrites your future. Nick turns his whole body toward her, eyes narrowing in pure shock. He is not rejecting the demand, but he is completely stunned. She is charging headfirst into the flames without a single flinch. You and I have to respect a power move like this. Emma looks him in the face and declares the era of the helpless victim officially dead. If she is staying in his violent reality, she wants the brutal truth. No soft padding. To be his true equal, she demands every filthy detail of his empire. Nick goes dangerously quiet. He puts down his mug and steps into her space, hunting for a single tremor of fear to justify keeping her locked in the safe room. But her gaze is pure steel. She wants the shadow wars and the dirty ledgers. Listen closely to this. Sometimes you have to throw away your safety net to finally stand at the same height as your demons. Emma is refusing to be a liability. She is claiming her throne, and the transformation is completely staggering. The undisputed king of this machine, a man who has spent 2 decades keeping a loaded gun under his pillow, looks at her and drops his armor. He exhales slowly, letting a lifetime of violent paranoia drain away. Walking over to his wall safe, he pulls out a thick titanium box. This is his holy grail. Inside sits an encrypted drive listing every bought judge, illegal account, and shallow grave tied to his soul. He warns her the contents might make her sick, but it belongs to her now. The wisdom buried in this moment is massive. Genuine trust is not about dressing up your best qualities. It is about handing the other person a loaded weapon pointed at your own chest, believing they will never pull the trigger. It is a terrifying, beautiful kind of surrender. He puts his literal life on the table. Nick tells her the vault is completely open, and if she wants to run away, his men will let her walk. But Emma does not even flinch. Her hands are completely steady as she takes the metal case, fully grasping the suffocating weight of the sins she just inherited. She offers a quiet word of thanks, and Nick returns a tired, honest smile that completely changes the temperature of the room. He speaks an undeniable fact. She is no longer just a piece on his chessboard. She is the singular reason he even cares if his empire survives until tomorrow. When you finally discover the one person who stops the room from spinning, you grip them with both hands. That is a fact you can bet your life on. The magnetic gravity between them is absolute. The second her fingers touch that freezing metal, Emma walks completely past the point of no return. She is wading into the deep end of a criminal ocean, swallowing his darkest mistakes. Hours later, we find her sitting alone in a silent office, the desk lamp throwing sharp shadows across scattered dossiers. That silver box rests there like an active grenade, holding the beating heart of a brutal syndicate. Yet, she refuses to panic. Her pulse stays as steady as a heavy clock striking midnight. Life proves time and again that true power is not always loud. Sometimes, it is maintaining a dead calm when everyone assumes you will fall to pieces. She touches the plastic access card, fully aware she is marching into a trench war, and she embraces the coming destruction. Picture this scene with me. The heavy oak door clicks open, and Nick fills the frame. There is no warning, just that towering gravity he brings into every space. But instead of his usual icy menace, he carries a raw, careful softness. He approaches the desk like a man walking into a cathedral, completely stripped of his armor. His voice is a low, rough whisper as he asks if she has opened the drive. Emma just swivels her leather chair to face him, radiating total peace. This dynamic highlights a crucial reality. The most dangerous people are often the ones who understand exactly when to drop their weapons, show their neck. Reading the emotional temperature of a room is a skill that keeps you alive, and Nick handles this delicate shift flawlessly. Emma locks eyes with him, and the entire power dynamic permanently resets. She states clearly she has no interest in being placed on a glass pedestal. She plans to carry the bloody weight and pull the hard triggers exactly when he does. Nick turns to stone, scanning her features like a man desperate to memorize a miracle. He sits close, pulling away the last veil of romance to deliver a harsh truth. If his world catches fire, she will burn right next to him. Morals evaporate, leaving only a savage fight for the next sunrise. But this is the core of any real alliance. A genuine partnership requires sitting in the mud together, not just the sunshine. You never get to wear the crown if you refuse to bleed. Emma never blinks. She quietly vows that they will outlive their enemies. The instant that promise hangs in the air, the clock simply stops. It is just 2 ghosts breathing in a quiet, shadowed room. Nick lifts his hand, his knuckles brushing her jaw, with a gentle reverence entirely foreign to his violent hands. She leans into the warmth of his palm, and he finally crosses the divide. This is not some cheap, dramatic romance. It is a collision, silent contract signed by 2 souls stepping off a cliff together. You and I know how the universe works. If you want the massive prize, you have to strike a match and burn your ships on the shore. Sometimes, willingly stepping past the point of no return is the only valid way to find out what you are truly built for. Her previous life is dead, and the ashes are already blowing away. When they finally pull back, the silence between them is thick with meaning. Emma rests her forehead directly against his, offering a small, deeply human smile that cracks his frozen exterior. She whispers a quiet promise that she is planted right here. Nick grips her fingers like she is a signal flare burning in the middle of a dark ocean. Beyond those heavy walls, rivals are gathering in the rain, desperate to strip away his territory. But inside this sanctuary, the game has evolved. She is no longer a civilian needing pity. She is a co-pilot. It shows us that a single sharp beam of light can fracture total darkness. When you secure a partner willing to stand shoulder to shoulder as the building burns, the math of survival shifts entirely. The monster just met his match. Let us watch how the reality shifts from here. The very next morning, Emma strides into the war room as an official architect of the syndicate. The atmosphere turns instantly dense. The smirks from hardened criminals vanish, replaced by a tight, nervous respect. She ignores the politics and buries her head straight into the corrupted accounting books, immediately spotting a ghost in the machine. Beneath layers of fake invoices, she traces a massive bleed of untraceable cash. Someone inside the family is boldly stealing from the devil himself. Let that be a lesson for anyone listening to this. You should never, ever overlook the quiet observer in the corner of the room. They are always the ones tracking the tiny fractures in the ceiling, long before the roof caves in. Think about the tension in that room. The heavy oak table, anchoring a space thick with cigar smoke and wounded egos. The syndicate's old guard glares at Emma as she calmly slides those receipts down the center glass. Nick just sits back and gives a slow, deliberate nod. When the tech expert confirms her numbers are flawless, the silence is suffocating. She doesn't stop at exposing the flaw. Over 2 weeks, she surgically dismantles their network, installing encryption and a risk model so sharp, even the boss takes notes. You and I have watched people bluff their way into power. But the truth is, competence is the ultimate silencer. If you really want respect, stop demanding it. Just put undeniable results on the table, and watch the world quietly make room for you. The stakes in this shadow economy are absolute. They sit across from an international syndicate, the air freezing over with unspoken threats. The rival suits attempt to bury a quiet, venomous clause in the paperwork, a trap designed to bleed Nick's empire dry. But Emma spots the snare immediately. Without hesitation, she slides a revised contract across the glass, trapping them in their own game and keeping the crown securely on Nick's head. Even Alex, the hardened security chief who once looked at her like a virus, gives her shoulder a solid clap. He finally sees she belongs. Later, as wine catches the firelight, the reality sinks in. The heavy truth of this world is that your actions will always forge a much stronger legacy than any empty promises you could ever make. Just as the dust settles, Emma turns her focus south, ripping a massive internal threat out of their supply chain by its roots. Later that evening, she leans against Nick by the warmth of fading embers. He pulls her close, and the terrifying ice-cold edge drops entirely from his voice. He admits she accomplished more than he ever thought possible. Emma just smiles softly, her fingers locking with his, and promises she is only just getting started. Never let anyone, especially yourself, place a ceiling on your potential. When you find your true rhythm, you press the pedal to the floor and keep driving. Nick lets out a quiet, grounding laugh, softly kissing her hair. He finally understands exactly what kind of rare force he brought into his life. Nick leans in close, his voice a gravelly whisper cutting through the quiet night. He tells her he doesn't need to see the rest of her tactical brilliance. He knows he bet on the right heart. Sitting in that flickering glow, they look like two fractured pieces locking perfectly into place. His syndicate is suddenly untouchable, not just because of fear, but because Emma gave the cold machine a beating pulse. As the sun rises, pouring gold across the mansion, Nick sips his coffee and just watches her breathe. She is the greatest plot twist he never saw coming. We spend so much of our lives fighting alone, but true power isn't about sitting isolated on a dark throne. Real power is finding that one rare soul who keeps your blade sharp and faithfully guards your back when the wolves start circling. The atmosphere in the room suddenly shifts, growing painfully thick, yet Nick plays it off as if they are discussing the weather. With a straight face, he asks if she is free this weekend to meet his mother. He doesn't want her there as his strategic partner or the shadow behind his throne, but simply as herself. You can see a rare crack of hesitation bleeding into this ruthless crime boss's eyes. A man who holds cities in a violent grip is suddenly terrified of a weekend trip. He tells her about a little wooden house buried in rural Wisconsin, a sanctuary entirely untouched by the blood on his hands. His mother just thinks stress and work demanding corporate hours. It serves as a profound reminder. No matter how much money or power you stack up in this life, you must never lose sight of where your story first started. Emma studies his exhausted eyes, and suddenly the picture snaps into focus. Beneath the terrifying armor of a syndicate boss, Nick is just a devoted son, burning his own soul to protect a tiny, innocent patch of heaven for his mother. She agrees without a second of doubt. Come the weekend, they hit the open highway just as dawn breaks. There are no blacked-out vehicles, no armed escorts. It is just the two of them watching the miles roll by. The quiet inside the car feels incredibly grounding. Emma shares memories of her father pushing financial papers on her as a child, while Nick talks about patching a roof with his mom. When they finally turn down a dusty road, a cabin sits anchored in an ocean of purple lavender. Emma feels her chest tighten. The most profound moments in this life are usually the simple ones we never see coming. His mother is already waiting out on the weathered wooden porch. She is a fragile woman, but her bright smile holds the absolute warmth of a rising sun. She wraps Nick in that desperate, grounding hug only a mother can give a son she deeply misses. Then she turns her kind eyes to Emma, pulling her right into the embrace and making her feel instantly safe. They share a beautiful lunch under the shade of ancient trees, eating and listening to the wind rustle the leaves. His mom laughs, sharing old stories of how quiet little Nick used to fight off neighborhood bullies to protect his younger brother. Emma smiles warmly until a heavy shadow passes over the table. The mother softly mentions how Nick completely froze up inside after his father passed. It is a harsh, undeniable truth of life. Unhealed emotional wounds will fundamentally change the very shape of who you are. After the plates are cleared, Nick gently guides his exhausted mother inside to rest. Emma steps out into the garden alone, letting her fingers softly brush against the blooming purple lavender. The absolute, profound peace of this sanctuary is staggering. It feels a million miles away from the cold concrete and the violence they navigate every single day. And standing right there in the golden sunlight, the heavy truth hits her chest like an anvil, Schreidensen's. She is entirely in love with him. She hasn't fallen for the ruthless king of the underworld, but for the gentleman who treats his mother like fragile glass, the man who quietly stands behind her and lets her be exactly who she is. At the end of the day, the greatest gift you can ever find is someone who loves your true, unfiltered soul without ever trying to rewrite a single line of your story. Nick steps back out into the light, spots her standing quietly among the flowers, and walks over without making a sound. He stops right beside her, and the back of his hand gently grazes against hers. It is a microscopic movement, but in their dangerous world, the gravity of it feels absolutely massive. Emma turns to face him, and for the very first time, the heavy, defensive armor she always wears just falls away completely. There is no strategic distance, no clever psychological games. She doesn't even need to speak the words aloud, because the heavy silence carries it all. The truth is in the raw vulnerability in her eyes, and the way their fingers slowly lock together under the endless sky. Listen to me on this one. Sometimes the most unbreakable promises are made without a single sound. true, profound connection lives purely in the quiet spaces between our words. The sun finally dips below the hills, and the night rolls in, painting the surrounding trees in heavy strokes of silver moonlight. Nick and Emma sit close together on an old, weathered wooden bench out back. There is no chaotic city static here, no secure phones ringing off the hook, just the deep, steady rhythm of the crickets. Nick stays dead silent for what feels like hours. His eyes are fixed on the dark tree line, slowly dragging a painful ghost up from the dirt. Emma just waits, feeling the agonizing weight sitting heavily on his chest. When he finally speaks, his voice is completely cracked and ruined. He tells her about Daniel, his little brother, a kid with a bright, trusting smile who genuinely believed the world was packed with good people. It truly breaks your heart, doesn't it? Innocence is a beautiful light, but in the wrong hands, it is the most fragile thing on earth. You and I need to look closely at this moment because the psychological pain gets incredibly deep here. When their father died, their mother fell apart. That was the moment Nick learned that protecting your blood means walking straight into the... But Daniel refused to accept the shadows. When their former crew got involved in something deeply rotten, Daniel tried to be the honorable hero and warned the wrong people. 3 days later, they pulled the boy out of a mangled car. It was a staged crash, a brutal message designed to silence a good kid. Nick discovered the truth when it was far too late. He couldn't even burn the crew to the ground without painting a massive target on his grieving mother. So, he swallowed the poison, buried his rage, and walked away. The agonizing reality of life is that sometimes doing the honorable thing will cost you absolutely everything. After putting his younger brother in the ground, Nick turned his own heart to stone. He forced himself to believe that human attachment was nothing but a fatal flaw in his armor. He looks at Emma now, his dark eyes shining with a raw intensity that could easily shatter glass. He tells her she isn't like Daniel. She knows exactly how vicious their syndicate reality truly is, yet she firmly plants her feet and chooses to stay. He looks right into her soul and swears that while he can never promise her a peaceful life, he will bleed out before he lets this ugly world take her away. Emma simply holds his gaze. She looks right past the violent crime boss and clearly sees the terrified, grieving boy still bleeding on the inside. She sees a true, desperate kind of love. The lesson here is simple. Real loyalty is choosing to stand by someone, even when their whole world is burning to the ground. Emma finally understands that real love is never found in grand, cinematic speeches. It is about waking up in the harsh, cold light of day and actively choosing that person. She reaches up, her fingers gently brushing against his rough cheek. She doesn't need a flawless, safe reality. She just needs the certainty that when everything inevitably shatters, his hand will be the one holding hers. She quietly vows that no matter how dark their violent road gets, she isn't running away. If the shadows of the syndicate try to swallow him whole, she will be the one to pull him back. Nick slowly turns his head, pressing a deeply respectful, grounding kiss right into her palm. It is an absolute, unspoken promise sealing their fate. In that quiet breath, Emma knows there is no turning back. The profound truth is, real strength isn't about standing perfectly tall. It is having someone's brave enough to pull you out of the dirt when you fall. Let us pause and really look at her. The remarkable detail here is her complete lack of fear. The man beside her carries a lifetime of violent scars and a history of devastating loss, yet he is exactly the person she wants in her corner for whatever wars are left to fight. As the frame slowly fades to a quiet backyard, we see a long, wooden table bathed in the glow of shivering candle flames. The night air smells faintly of sweet lavender. A massive full moon watches from above, a silent witness to their fresh start. Nick pours the red wine, his eyes revealing a soft vulnerability his underworld peers have never seen. True victory in this life is not about building a dark empire. It is finding that one soul who brings you unshakable peace in the chaos. You and I both know how incredibly rare these quiet moments are when a life is drenched in constant danger. Time itself has finally hit the brakes, giving them a chance to breathe. This is not the end of their story, and it is not some magical reset button. They are stepping into a new chapter because they actively chose each other. Nick slowly raises his glass, his eyes locking onto hers, without a single wall left. He thanks her for staying, even after he laid bare the ugliest fragments of his soul. The sharp clink of their glasses rings out through the dark garden. Emma smiles, knowing the truth. The lesson here is simple. None of us are flawless, but looking your own demons in the eye is where true strength begins. Under the warm amber glow of those shivering candles, the Mafia masks fade away. They are just a man and a woman sharing a quiet meal. They trade soft stories, letting the comfortable silence speak for them. The time for dramatic blood oaths and impossible vows is completely over. The only thing that matters now is the quiet certainty that when the sun rises tomorrow, they will still be standing side by side. Their chaotic saga proves a beautiful point about human nature. Real connection does not come from finding someone perfectly whole. It comes from looking directly at Beatles' pieces and deciding to do the healing work together. If you find someone willing to stay patient on your worst days, that steady anchor will carry you through any storm. So here they stand, staring down a grueling rebuild. And we are not just talking about clawing back his lost territory on the streets. They are building something far more terrifying for people like them, a genuine home, a real foundation of trust where they can finally drop their guard. They both know the road ahead will be brutal, paved with old enemies. But the profound difference today is that they never have to fight these wars alone again. What do you make of this wild ride with Nick and Emma? Have you ever found yourself in a spot where your heart screams for one thing, but your logic fights back with everything it has? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The most meaningful thing we can do is share our own struggles, leaning on each other when the night goes dark.
The Betrayal by Marcus Lannan teaches us a serious lesson about trust inside organizations and relationships. Marcus is not an outsider. He is someone Nick once treated like a brother, someone with deep access to the company's financial system and enough knowledge to hide a sophisticated siphoning network. That makes his betrayal more dangerous than any external threat. He understands the internal structure, the weak points, and the habits of the people around him. This is an important educational message for workplaces, families, and leadership systems. Trust should never mean the absence of accountability. Many organizations feel because leaders assume long history equals loyalty. But betrayal can grow quietly in familiar places, especially where power, money, and secrecy meet. Emma's role becomes essential because she brings fresh eyes. She is not blinded by old friendship, internal politics, or emotional loyalty. She follows the numbers. Her investigation shows that objective evidence can reveal what personal trust may hide. Educationally, the story highlights the value of transparent systems, checks and balances, and independent review. Even the strongest leader can miss what they do not want to believe. Nick struggles because Marcus's betrayal is not only financial, it is emotional. It reopens old wounds connected to his brother Daniel and his fear of trusting the wrong person again. The lesson is that betrayal hurts most when it comes from someone close. But the answer is not to trust no one. The answer is to build trust wisely. Real loyalty should be supported by honesty, evidence, responsibility, and the willingness to face uncomfortable facts. Emma's careful analysis proves that truth does not depend on Paolon's fiat, depend on patterns, proof, and the courage to follow the trail even when it leads to someone important.